We compete against other convenience stores. We compete against independent operators, right, who have, fuel pumps in front of their store. And so, we are, the most dynamic pricing activity that we have is around fuel, just because of the volatility of that market. But again, it's a very important part of our business. I mean, it's a third of the enterprise's total EBITDA. I would say it's funny. I would say it's a trip driver, and it certainly can be. But in our business, about 3/4 of the visits to our stores don't involve fuel. So, we have a very relevant offering inside of the store, obviously centered on our food, but, more broadly speaking, across the entire assortment that draws people in. And then they happen to fuel up when they're at the store getting something else. In terms of the food business, we compete with QSR because of, you think about breakfast and lunch primarily. So, we're competing against McDonald's, against Wendy's, against players like that for that AM occasion, for that lunch occasion. And then at dinner, right, we're competing against, the big guys, Pizza Hut, Domino's, Papa John's, Little Caesars, as well as, to your point, like, DoorDash and everybody else.
What is the country's 5th largest pizza chain doing to expand its reach? Hello, this is Jonathan Mays, Editor-in-Chief of Restaurant Business, and in this week's episode of A Deeper Dive, I speak with Tom Brennan, the Chief Merchandising Officer for the Iowa-based Casey's. That's right, the convenience store chain is the 5th largest pizza concept in the U.S., at least based on sales. This is a fascinating conversation with a top executive of a company that is a growing competitor to a number of different restaurant chains, including much of the pizza business. We talk about that pizza business and how it became so vital to the company. Casey's has been generating strong pizza sales this year, even as fast food pizza chains have been stagnant, which has been great for Casey's stock price. Tom explains the company's secret. We also talk about Casey's broader foray into the food business, and we talk about beverages and how Casey's plans to improve its sales in that area. We're talking convenience store pizza on A Deeper Dive, so please check it out. Okay, I'm here with Tom Brennan. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jonathan. Very happy to be here.
All right. Well, judging from your background, I tell you, you're not in a restaurant chain. Tell us who you are, what you do.
Absolutely. So again, Tom Brennan, I'm the Chief Merchandising Officer here at Casey's. We are a convenience store chain that has over 2,900 locations, really through the heartland of the middle part of the country. We're actually the 3rd largest convenience store in the U.S. We happen to also be the 4th largest liquor license holder in the United States. And then we are the 5th largest pizza chain. So we believe that, everything we have on offer, which really is, of course, our crown jewel is our pizza and our food platform overall. But we have so much more that we bring to the guests and the communities that we serve. And that's why we feel we're really a category of one.
Yeah, I am. Let's talk about that pizza thing, because you guys have done some fascinating things on the pizza front. But you said you are the 5th largest pizza chain. So how much pizzas do you guys sell?
Correct. So we sell over 40 million whole pies every year, and that number continues to grow. So significant amount. And we've been selling it for 40 years as well. And so it's really become just a part of our culture as an organization. And it is an expectation for, again, the guests and the communities that we serve, and definitely serves as a highlight for those guests because we're there, with slices at breakfast and lunch, and then, of course, whole pies throughout the day, but in particular that dinner day part, which I think is something that really makes us unique in the convenience store space. If you look at other food-forward convenience stores, nobody really has the dinner day part covered like we do because of that whole pizza occasion, the gathering nature of it, right? The solution for busy families, and just a great way to celebrate as well. So we certainly pride ourselves on that. And again, because of everything else that we have on offer in addition to that, it really makes us that category of one.
How did pizza become such a big deal for you guys? Because it's not insignificant.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, we just recently celebrated our 40th anniversary of selling pizza at Casey's. This was back in April of this year. And really, again, I've been at the company, it'll be 6 years in October. And, going back 4 decades, it really started, the typical origin story, right, of a lot of great things that come about. But back then, Casey's actually had franchisees. And one of the franchisees had the idea to sell pizza by the slice out of a warmer. And it was actually a frozen pizza that he just heated up and began to sell by the slice. And again, kind of on his own initiative as an entrepreneur. And of course, right, so Casey's corporate learns about it, and they go out and they say, okay, what's going on? And then they saw the velocity that he was doing, and they said, I think this is a pretty good idea. And, we could definitely run with this. But of course, we didn't want to sell frozen pizza, right? And then you think about the rural nature. So I didn't mention, but about 2/3 of our stores are in towns of 20,000 people or less. And so you think about what that means from a distribution standpoint, supply chain standpoint, being able to, get them deliveries. So the company really created our made from scratch program. So in, every one of our stores that operates with a kitchen and is selling pizza, they make dough from scratch every single day. So, that craftsmanship was really developed all those decades ago and has continually been refined over the years as the business has grown. And then, of course, within the last 6 years, really starting with Darren Rebelez, who came in as the chief executive officer in the summer of 2019, we have definitely made a lot of investment in terms of building out capability from a culinary standpoint, building out really professional innovation practices at Casey's. And those have really scaled over like I said, over the last 5-6 years, and we've really seen accelerated growth in what was already a very, very strong category for the company.
Right. Darren was a very fascinating hire because I know he came from that industry, but he spent some time in the restaurant business and then takes the Casey's job and then just starts building up your in-store food service sales. And now that's become a really key growth engine for you guys, has it not?
It absolutely is. And so if you take a look at our current 3-year strategic plan, at the center of that plan, what we call our strategy map, is accelerate the food business. And so that's food and dispensed beverage overall, but really, again, pizza is about half. If you look at our prepared food and dispensed beverage sales at Casey's, which were over $1 billion in the last 12 months, half of that comes from pizza. And that roughly breaks down to about half of that being sold by the slice. Again, we have a very robust slice business in that breakfast and lunch time frame. And then the other half is whole pies. And again, we sell whole pies throughout the day. In fact, I think one of the really interesting aspects is our breakfast pizza. And certainly you'll see, you'll pull into one of our stores in the morning and you'll see somebody coming out with a half a dozen whole pies that are all breakfast pizza they're taking to their office or place of work, to share with their team. And so that definitely is a pretty robust business. But then again, that dinner day part that I've talked about is such a huge piece of that as well. And so, yeah, food is a central component of how we continue to differentiate and drive relevancy with our guests. And then, again, everything else that we have surrounding that only helps us be even more relevant in more ways to everybody that we serve in Casey's country.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you about some of those other things in a minute, but I want to keep on this pizza thing. So now delivery has been sort of a kind of a big deal for you guys, has it not?
It is. I think we are unique in terms of, you look at the big pizza players, right? So again, we're number 5. So if you look at the top 4, they typically have a much higher penetration of delivery as the fulfillment for their pizza. Again, because of our footprint, we actually skew more heavy with pickup. And so, a lot of our guests prefer to come into a Casey's to pick up their pizza. And then from there, they'll go, they can shop the rest of the store, right? Or as part of their order ahead, right? They'll ask for items to be prepared or to be assembled there with their pizza. But yeah, we're about 20% of our pizza volume is going on by delivery, which again is a lower index versus the competition. But we also are committed to continuing to grow that business, right? Because you think about the convenience that offers. We also think about the incrementality that comes from delivery, right? Because I think what's interesting as we look at our guest data, we'll see the same person will, sometimes they'll do pickup and sometimes they'll do delivery, right? Just think about how, our days change, our needs change kind of over the course of a week. And so, sometimes people want to come in and pick it up and other times they want it delivered. And we want to be able to offer that suite of solutions to those guests. And so we will continue to look at ways that we can accelerate delivery. I think another important component of delivery as well, as it feeds into the overall pizza business, is when we think about how our business has evolved, particularly over the last 5-6 years, as we've grown significantly. A lot of our growth, right, has been in what we would call non-core markets. So areas that traditionally Casey's has not operated. And so whereas, if you're in Iowa, you're in Missouri, you're in Illinois, and parts surrounding, you say Casey's to somebody and immediately their response is going to be pizza. You get outside of that. So say like, Tennessee, parts of Kentucky, Arkansas, Texas, you say Casey's and people go, oh, that's a convenience store. Oh, they sell pizza too. Oh, that's interesting. And so, we're really trying to bring the same awareness and love for the pizza that we have, what we call core Casey's country, in those newer markets. And delivery is actually a big vehicle to do that, right? Because we know through our research that people, in order to think of you as a pizza place, you got to be able to deliver. And so, that's a table stakes moment for any purveyor of pizza. And so, again, we have that across a good portion of our stores, and we're going to continue to look for ways that we can grow that.
Yeah. One of the things I find, I mean, this to me, like right now, frankly, I think that the pizza sector is maybe the most interesting sector in the restaurant industry. And the other one is beverages. And I'm going to ask you about beverages here in a minute. But like the pizza sector is fascinating because it's changing, right? So you've got the advent of third party delivery is taking away a substantial percentage of that delivery business. So a lot of consumers, instead of just automatically getting a pizza when they want to order delivery, or now have all of these options. One of them obviously being convenience stores. I can now get delivery from all these convenience stores now, which I wasn't able to do just not that long ago. But I can get delivery from all of these other places, and it's sort of forced your Domino's, your Pizza Huts, and your Papa John's of the world to try to figure out how to be competitive. And it's made them more reliant on their in-store business, for one thing. And then the other thing is now they're doing a lot of deals with third-party delivery. But I think that in a world in which pizza chains have to compete for that carry-out business, that gives you a certain advantage. Because frankly, if I'm thinking about pizza, and if it's a decision, if I'm thinking about pizza, but I also want a 64-ounce bottle of pop. I'm in the Midwest, so I have to call it pop.
As you should.
As I should, because that's the right way to call it. I have to get, if I want a 64-ounce bottle of pop, and I won't comment as to whether I've actually done that or not. Well, that absolutely gives an advantage. Or I can get some late night Doritos. I don't know why I'm thinking about late night Doritos right now. But but the fact of the matter is it gives you an advantage, because not only can I get a pizza, but I can get a number of other things in the process. That seems to give you an advantage, whether we're talking delivery or we're talking carryout. No, does it not?
It absolutely does. And back to the category of one comment from earlier, it's exactly the fact that we have such a broad assortment that is available to our guests that the other pizza players just can't match. They have a lot of non-alcoholic beverages. Not all the options that we have. They don't have alcohol, which we have, right, to include liquor. Again, I'm fourth largest liquor license holder in the U.S., as I mentioned earlier. And so you think about the ways that you can fill a basket at Casey's is really unmatched. Traditional QSR, and particularly the big pizza players. And so that's something that we really lean into. So it was, I think it was about three years ago, we trademarked the official pizza and beer headquarters. That's actually a trademark that Casey's owns, registered trademark. And we did that for this very reason, right? Is the fact that, where else can you get a 12-pack of beer along with an amazing whole pizza? And so, again, we'll continue to search for ways to drive even greater connection, to drive, more attachments to the basket with relevant items for our guests. Because to your point, right, it's a huge competitive advantage for us.
Can't believe I didn't mention pizza and beer. What's wrong with me? But pizza and beer goes together. You can pick them up at the same time, whatever. And, again, it provides a tremendous advantage. Now, you said you're looking in other areas. Let's cast aside beverages. I know beverages are a big deal. I definitely want to talk about beverages because it's a big deal. But are there other, is there other areas where you're making a big push?
Yeah. So, I think two very specific examples of things that we've done within the last year. So about, probably 15, 18 months ago, actually longer than that, one of the things that we had identified was we saw a big opportunity with our lunch and dinner sandwich business. And so what I mean by that is think, hamburger, think chicken, chicken sandwich, spicy chicken sandwich. So one of the things that we are absolutely committed to and fanatical about is providing the highest quality food, the highest quality experience, right? Because without that, then, you're really unmoored in a very competitive environment. And so we looked at our lunch and dinner sandwich business and said, we've got an opportunity to really bring those items to the same level of quality as our pizza. And so our category team on the food side, our culinary team, did a lot of work working with a lot of our supplier partners to identify, what were the right items and the right level of quality for those items to really reintroduce those to our guests. And so we did that over a year ago. And, in a fairly mature part of the business, we saw, upwards of 80% growth.
Really?
And so, yes. And again, it just shows you, right, that when you get quality right, when you get the assortment right, when you absolutely deliver those for your guests and do it in a manner that's consistent at an affordable price, right? So we're not about chasing a price point because, one of the things I think one of the traps that some of our competition will fall into from time to time is they'll focus on the price point and they end up pulling quality out, right, of the item. And you might get somebody to engage with you once at a price point, but if it's not a great experience, it doesn't taste great, right? It doesn't deliver on all those things that they're looking for, then they're not going to come back. And so, we certainly want to be affordable, but we're not going to do it at the price of lower quality. And so, we really saw that, play out in terms of the journey that we undertook as related to our sandwiches. And they've absolutely, and even after cycling that tremendous growth, they're still positive, right? So we're still seeing them as a growth driver. And again, just continuing to be relevant in that space. And then another one that's actually even more recent is we're testing a sauced wings program actually here in Des Moines. So our Des Moines DMA, which is about 230 stores, we've launched sauced wings, seen some good success with those, right? And so we know we've got that pizza occasion, right? But people, as much as we'd love for people to eat pizza every day, we know that people, are going to, they're going to want different options, different experiences. And we certainly think wings, one, they're a great complement to pizza for a larger group occasion, but then also they could be a night of their own. And, we've gotten a lot of good feedback from our guests here locally that have engaged with the program. And we're going to begin to scale that across the enterprise really over the next 3 years. So those would be two very, specific examples of things that we're working on right outside of pizza, but part of our broader overall goal to accelerate the food business.
Fascinating. So you mean to tell me that consumers want higher quality food and not just cheap stuff?
Yeah, probably not a newsflash, right? But it is interesting though, as you just look at what's happening in the marketplace, right? And what others are doing. And so again, we don't want to be, so expensive. And in fact, the reality is too, is how we're priced is we're typically at a bit of a discount, to our competition. Part of that's built in, right? How we kind of think about the business, so, we like having, we call it dry powder. We also like the opportunity to capture share in that regard. And so again, I think we can, we're very efficient in our operation and we're really focused on continuing to get even more efficient. That gives us that flexibility, right? To lean in where we need to. And we're talking about growing new categories or we're talking about specific promotions that we want to do to break through to our guests and really stand out in what is a pretty loud and crowded competitive marketplace. And I think we've really found a good rhythm that we've been able to execute here, particularly I'd say over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Look, you're competing with competing with other convenience stores, you're competing with a large number of restaurants, independent and otherwise, and I don't think the consumer today just wants cheap food for cheap food's sake. I really don't. And I think that's been kind of the lesson of the past few years in particular, is that the consumer today has higher expectations than they've ever had because they can get really good food from a number of different places. And I think to me, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for anybody, whether it's a quick service restaurant or a convenience store, to just throw out cheap, low cost food because they think that that's their way to win, because it's just not a long-term winning strategy. Eventually you have to produce a quality product, period. That's what I think.
Yeah, and I think a great example of that would be our quarter pound Angus hamburger, right? So that was one of the items, obviously, that we relaunched and really kind of took down to the studs and built back up, working with our supplier partners. And because it was Angus beef, because we had a brioche bun, right, that was now new, those were higher cost items. So, obviously, right, we like I said, we want to be affordable. We like kind of our spot of being a little bit less expensive, right, than some prevailing market prices. We also were in a position where because of those costs, we had to take a little bit more retail. And even in taking that retail, it didn't stop the guests from engaging with it and absolutely driving phenomenal growth. And again, it came back to the quality. So people, affordability is really about what you get, the value that you get for the price that you pay. And so if you can deliver really high quality, and again, at a fair price, you're going to absolutely drive velocity. And we've seen that.
Yeah. And consumers will absolutely pay for convenience. They'll only pay so much, but they will definitely pay for convenience. And we're starting to figure out where that equilibrium is. Yeah, it's definitely it's something that I'll pay for it. I mean, good grief. I mean, of course, consumers will pay for it. They're spending a lot of money on third party delivery fees right now. So, but all right, let's talk about beverages because I've been promising to talk about beverages, and that's another fascinating thing. And that's one area where you guys would have a significant advantage. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing on the beverage.
So traditionally, our beverage business, right, is all is guest serve, right? So self serve. So we made a lot of news and a big splash early part of this year in January. We relaunched our coffee business under the Darn Good Coffee name, and had really aggressive promotions to get it kicked off. But again, taking a step back with our process and how we always think about solving problems and opportunities inside of the business, we went back to the drawing board, really leaned in on heavy research, for our guests in terms of, people who were still drinking Casey's coffee, people who used to drink Casey's coffee, but it had not transacted with us on coffee in the last 12 months. And then people who had never tried us, right? And we wanted to assess kind of what people's perceptions were, how they felt about our blends. So it was really taking the outside in point of view to understand the business. Then we also partnered with experts in the field from a supplier standpoint to really help, use their point of view and expertise to help us understand, where we needed to go in terms of, reinventing the program. And so again, very, very a lot of time taken and a painstaking process to do the research, to do the testing, and to really come up with a lineup of what are, tremendously, enjoyable blends. I'm a big coffee drinker, right? It's part of my morning ritual. And so we launched that program, this past January to a lot of success. And I say that coffee was an opportunity because, I've been in the convenience retail business most of my career. And I spent a good number of years with 7-Eleven. For as much love and traction Casey's gets for our prepared food business, obviously with pizza being the center of that, we don't get a lot of credit for beverages. And I think coffee in particular, we do a good job on fountain, but fountain is relatively commoditized, right? Largely kind of in the industry. But coffee, to some extent, right? You can say drip coffee certainly is a bit more commoditized. But again, quality matters, right? And your ability to deliver quality, to deliver a relevant assortment, to do it in a consistent manner, with your guests is a hugely important factor in making it sustainable and viable for the business. And we certainly, have really changed the trajectory on that business. Another one is frozen carbonated. That's one that we've also struggled with, right? You think about the relevance of Slurpee to the 7-Eleven brand and the velocity they drive in their stores with that brand. And again, we were nowhere close to that in terms of just our frozen carbonated offering at Casey's. And we've taken, a new approach there in terms of, the products that we have on the machines, and also getting the machines into our stores. Cause we had a number of stores that just didn't have that offering. And so really it's like, there's some really kind of convenience fundamentals that we've brought to that side of the business. But, and again, see a lot of growth potential there and just continued relevance into the future. But I'm pretty sure where you're going in your question is more on the made to order side. And so we definitely see a gigantic opportunity in front of us at Casey's to crack the code on made to order beverages, how that fits in our stores, how that fits in our operation, because it is absolutely a need state and a desire that our guests have. I mean, you see it with all of the kind of the beverage focused, brands that are having a lot of success. You think about Dutch Brothers, you think about Seven Brew, you think about Scooter's Coffee, so it's definitely a need that's there. And it's one that we're just not addressing as Casey's, right? Because that hasn't been part of our offering up to now. But, we're looking to begin testing and understanding what that could mean for us. And again, in a way that's going to fit in with everything else that we do. You think about all of the food that we make from, a grab and go perspective in terms of our hot cases as well as our cold case. You think about the made to order business we have, with Whole Pie. And now wings, right? That will begin scaling again. The sauce wings program will begin scaling over the next 3 years. We know that made to order is absolutely the next frontier for us to figure out how to do it at Casey's. And I'm confident we're going to be able to do that. And yeah, we're going to have an amazing program.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine like having a higher quality coffee program is actually table stakes for you guys now. And not just again like the frozen beverages notwithstanding, which is also kind of a big deal, period. As somebody who has 2 children who will literally sit in a movie theater drinking a gallon of whatever iced beverages. I'm like, what? That's a lot of sugar. Anyway, But I'd say to imagine the coffee business, because I've always considered that convenience stores are a pretty heavy coffee competitor to restaurants. But at the end of the day, but at the same time, like we go back and talk about quality. Quality is really important. It is insanely competitive in the United States right now.
Incredibly competitive, and you have a new entrant like Luckin coming over from China, and how they're looking to disrupt that space. But it's competitive, right? Because it's something people want, right? It's something people engage with. And so figuring out the best way to be a part of that marketplace, right, as a brand like Casey's, that's why it's certainly very high on our list. And we're already doing work against it, right? And we'll begin testing, here in the future about how do we deliver on that experience in a way that holds true to our brand, and how, we show up in the communities that we're present in and that we serve. But again, we just see it as a tremendous opportunity. And again, you fall back to the quality piece, which is foundational to everything that we do. Our ability and the credibility that we have because of our pizza platform, because of our overall food offering. We know that when we do this made to order beverage play, we're gonna approach it with the same fundamentals, underlying it. And that's, again, quality, affordability, and really look to drive some velocity and continue to iterate on that, because it's such a huge part of what people expect and how people are engaging and spending their dollars, and what is a very competitive marketplace, as you point out.
Yeah. One last question. Who are your competitors? Who would you say your competitive set is right now? And how is that different from, say, when you first got in the business?
Well, we have many competitors because we play in so many verticals. So if you think about fuel, right? So we compete against other convenience stores, we compete against independent operators, right, who have, fuel pumps in front of their store. And so, we are, the most dynamic pricing activity that we have is around fuel, just because of the volatility of that market. But again, it's a very important part of our business. I mean, it's a third of the enterprise's total EBITDA. And it's certainly, I would say, it's funny. I would say it's a trip driver, and it certainly can be. But in our business, about 3/4 of the visits to our stores don't involve fuel. So, we have a very relevant offering inside of the store, obviously centered on our food, but, more broadly speaking, across the entire assortment, that draws people in, and then they happen to fuel up when they're at the store getting something else. But again, so we're competing in that vertical. In terms of the food business, we compete with QSR because you think about breakfast and lunch primarily. So, we're competing against McDonald's, against Wendy's, against players like that, for that AM occasion, for that lunch occasion. And then at dinner, right, we're competing against, the big guys, Pizza Hut, Domino's, Papa John's, Little Caesars, as well as, to your point, like, DoorDash and everybody else. You can get delivery of all these different restaurants that are out there. But, primarily, when we think about the food business, it's that QSR slant from, that breakfast and lunch day part. And then it's the pizza slant when we think about, that dinner occasion. And now as we're expanding into sauce wings, right, that brings Wingstop into the mix, right? Buffalo Wild Wings. And so as we think about it, right, when we do a competitive analysis, depending on the category, it really depends on the specific offer that we have, and then who is the most relevant competition inside of that. And then you take a step back, right? We compete, tobacco products, we compete on beer, we compete on energy drinks, we compete on carbonated soft drinks or pop, as you were saying earlier, right? We compete on all the snack items, the grocery items, primarily, obviously, single serve, immediately consumable. So we're playing in all these different areas, which, certainly sounds like a lot. But again, it also is a huge advantage for us, and we think is a big unlock, because we have all these offers that, are in the assortment. And so as someone is thinking about, hey, I need dinner tonight, I can also get, a 12-pack of beer. I can get, a couple 2 liters, right? I can get some chips to go along with that. And so we're constantly thinking about, how do we keep our assortment as relevant as possible to, maximize on the convenience that we provide to our guests as they have these different need states throughout the day. And so pretty long-winded answer, but I think to the question is, we have so many different competitive lenses that we look at depending on what part of the business we're thinking about. But again, as we think about Casey's holistically, we see that as a huge competitive advantage, because again, we have all these different need states that we can answer inside of our stores.
Yeah, well, open-ended questions are my friend, but also the fact of the matter is the convenience store, as far as I'm concerned, competes with literally everything from a power outlet to Walmart.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even mention, to your point, the rest of broad retail, like big box, like grocery, right? And a lot of them, I mean, they're all talking about how do they drive frequency, right? How do they get more people into their stores? And certainly that's a lifeblood for anybody, whether you're a QSR, whether you're, a big box retailer, whether you're a convenience store. And again, we really like our spot because of everything we have on offer, and the way that we show up and the relevancy that it's driven, the love that it's driven, the brand love for Casey's. So we're going to continue to lean into that as we go forward.
All right, superb, Tom. This was great. Really appreciate you joining me this week on the podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was a pleasure.
And that should do it for this week's episode of A Deeper Dive, which was edited, as always, by Spoons, artwork by Nico Hines. You may find this and other episodes of the podcast on our website, www.restaurantbusinessonline.com/article/deeper-dive. But by all means, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'm Jonathan Mays, your host, podcast producer, and the editor-in-chief of Restaurant Business. Thank you for listening.